the easiest way to get the story is this, because I always enjoyed tattoos. I used to see tattoos on TV, and like Mike Ness from Social Distortion is covered in tattoos. I was like, I want to look just like that. But I didn't want to do tattoos for a living because I thought they were all fairly old school designs, you know, which is based off folk art, and I wanted to do more realistic images. So I had a friend of mine who was going out with a tattoo artist from Virginia Beach, and he offered to teach me, and I said, you know, thank you, but that's not what I want to do. And quite a few years later, I'd been to art school. I was doing art for bands and clubs and stuff. And a friend of my brother's is a tattoo artist named Chad Divil, and he painted as well, and he saw my stuff. He's like, well, he should learn to tattoo. But by this time, I'd seen a lot of tattoo artists doing a lot of, you know, more complex, realistic stuff, and I really felt a connection with that, and I was like, yeah, that's an awesome medium. You can do a lot of what, you can actually have more creative freedom to do what you want than in books or magazines. So I jumped on the opportunity. I like horror. I like horror art. I like horror books, horror movies. I think there's more of an intrinsic story there. There's more of a background. Yeah, it's darker, and I do prefer it to be a little bit darker, but I also feel like there's more meat to the subject. Like, you can see a horror image, and you know that there's something complex behind it. You see just an average photo off the street, and you don't really realize that. There's not that story. And I like stories a lot. I like every single image to tell a story. I mean, everything's tied together, at least it is for me. So a good movie is good art, a good book is good art, a painting, a tattoo, and I like my stories have a very, like when I write, I like the stuff I write to have a very visual aspect, and when I do something art-wise, I like for it to have a story behind it. I like them all to tie together, so it's all a matter of telling stories in different means and different formats. Yeah, well, I've actually, in the novel I'm writing, I've had people read sections of it and say, well, you're obviously an artist. Because one thing I really don't like is when I'll be reading something and I'm like, this is a very interesting, awesome story, but I can't picture anything. I mean, is that fence an old, broken down, rotted fence? Is it brand new? You know, the forest, are the trees, you know, blooming? Is it autumn? I want you to experience everything. I want you to feel like you're right there in the middle of it. So I describe the leaves, if they're, you know, if they're in fall colors, if they're in oranges and yellows and so on. I describe that. I describe like the sunlight, you know, coming down in shafts of light through the foliage. I want you to get a real feel. I was big into, I'm still into it, but the like lowbrow underground community with, you know, punk rock and metal and so on. And they love when people do artwork because a lot of people don't do artwork, and they have fanzines and they have, you know, flyers for bands playing and ads and so on. And so I added a lot to that. So yeah, it was a lot of my friends. My family didn't necessarily like what I was into, but they liked the fact that I was into art. Although they said that wasn't a good living, and got really upset when I was into it and I turned, you know, 17, 18, but that's a different story. Making something work, pulling something off, I think it's a matter of inspiration. It's, you know, sometimes you see something and you go, you know what, this is what I should fucking do. And sometimes you see it and you go, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? Like, I really like for instance, I like the artist John Harris a lot, because when you see his paintings, you know, a lot of them, you know, there'll be space scenes, there'll be planetary scenes, but have a large sense of mass. You can feel it popping out of the canvas. And I want every image to do that. And when you don't know how to do that, that's, you know, I've turned things down because I can't figure out how to make it work. The best artistic mistake? I did a painting in art school, and we were supposed to do a self-portrait. And I did half of my face a realistic face and half my face a skull. So it looked kind of bland. I did it in graphite and ink, and it was all right. But I got frustrated at it, so I pulled out a straight razor and I just chopped it all up. And I was like, wait a minute, I really like the look of that. So I got another piece of paper and I glued those strips to it. And actually before I glued it, I got a paintbrush and I started splattering black on it. So I was like, I'll have a black background. But then I really liked the way there were these sketchy big brush strokes. So I glued the strips over top of the sketchy brush strokes, and I was like, that made the painting. That's awesome. I don't live a normal life. I like a lot of stuff. I read a lot. I just yesterday went out and I checked out a lot of what's going on in the Austin art scene. They had that big East Side art show, and I like to see what other people are up to. A lot of what other people do inspires you to do your own thing. So I don't really have a problem with that. I have way too many projects to have time to work on them, but I'm trying. When I was in 7th grade, I wrote my first full novel. I'm sure it's terrible if you read it now, but when I wrote it, I was really into it, and I actually drew illustrations for it. And when I was in high school, I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I was really disappointed because they won't let you. I interviewed a couple times with DC Comics, and they won't let you write and draw the story. You do one or the other, and I really wanted to do both. And I took both creative writing and I took college level art classes in high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to focus on. I eventually went to art school, but I've always written, and I always want to tell stories. It comes back to always wanting to tell stories. And the book I'm working on right now, I'm going to paint a front cover, I'm going to paint a back cover, and if the publisher will let me, like every 15 pages, I'll have an illustration. It's kind of hard to describe because if I go too short with it, it sounds cheesy, and if I go too long, you get bored and you tune out. But there's a little bit of a science fiction element, but it's more like a Blade Runner, Alien, kind of a dark sci-fi element. There's a little bit of a horror element. I mean, where would a story be without a horror element? And there's definitely it's mainly focusing around one guy, and he's very introspective, and he goes through a lot. And there's kind of almost like an apocalyptic scenario that happens, and it's him just trying to deal with all that. That's a good question. I don't think anything direct is in there, but people that know me well will be like, that happened to Dan, that also happened to Dan, and you know, and I do have a number of references to my ex-wife who died, and I miss her, and I put that in the story. I like Austin a lot, actually. A lot of what was in New York. I first moved there. I went to art school in DC, and I was like, if I want to be an artist, I should be in New York. So I moved to New York, and there's a very cool underground scene. You know, people were selling stuff on the street in little kiosks. There were cool clubs. There were cool bars. It was just, like I said, it was a cool scene. A lot of that's gone. Like, whatever Giuliani didn't get rid of, the recession killed. So since all that's going and all that remains is the high cost of living, but it's like, you know, you walk downtown and it's ESPN, Disney, and whatever, I wanted to move. And when I found out about Austin, I had friends that were here, and I came down, I did a guest spot at Shade Modifications, another tattoo shop, and I really liked Austin. Look out for my book. My book's coming out. It's done. I had a publisher already pick it up, but with the recession, they've like slowed down the release schedule. So I'm doing an extensive edit, and I'm gonna try a whole round of publishers. But that's a huge event. The Giant Art Show is May 30th in New York City. Everybody's welcome to come.